never mentioned that there were men as dark as this. Wow, look at that nose. He's just like a pig. He's a monster!
In today's episode, I'm joined by Hui-Ling. You are a Blasian, you're a PhD candidate, and you wrote the article, Is New York City's Plan to Diversify Specialized High Schools Racist Towards Asian Americans? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to talk about that, but I first wanted to get into like the racism aspect that you dealt with, because you mentioned that your father, who's black, had to deal with racism from your Chinese side of the family. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I'll first give a little background of my family, if that's okay, a little origin story. But basically, my dad, he's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He grew up in a low-income family. So, like, my grandfather was in the war, and then he came back and had multiple jobs to take care of his family. And then my grandmother, she took care of, I think she cleaned houses and probably took care of older people, but they never went to college. And then my dad, he ended up going out to Kansas to a small like Christian university there where he met my mom. So he picks up my mom from the airport because that was his job as a resident director. And since that interaction, they started dating and they ended up getting married. But yeah, they definitely, as a couple back in the late 70s, had like they got strange looks. Like it wasn't really normal for a black person and a Chinese person to be together.
Yeah.
When they did get married, my mom's family never really approved of the marriage. In fact, none of them actually ended up going to the wedding, partly because they mostly live in Taiwan, where she's from. So my mom's an immigrant too, by the way. So she really didn't have experience with like Black America at all. And then my father definitely didn't deal with Chinese people either, but you know, whatever, they got together. So they ended up merging families and cultures, and they had like 6 kids. But there's plenty of stories to tell. One of them that I know about is when my dad went to visit my mom's aunt. She kind of like slammed the door in his face. And then, yeah, like it was really rough. I think, you know, she eventually apologized years later, but even like my mom's like baby cousin, like was 4 years old at the time. And my dad had this afro and he was like patting his head and like, yeah, was like touching his hair, but also said, I don't like Black people either. So at 4 years old, this child already, who was Chinese, somehow didn't like Black people. So yeah, that was big. There was no relationship with my grandfather. My dad met him once in his lifetime. And it wasn't until after he passed that my dad actually went to Taiwan with my mom. And that was after they were married for 40 years. Okay. So there's definitely some tension.
Okay. So you discussed the racism that you face. How were your parents in particular able to stay together and overcome that racism?
You know, I think it took a lot of love and dedication. I know it wasn't easy. I think like relationships are hard in general, but yeah, I think they just kind of really believed in their relationship and staying together and building trust, building a friendship and growing their lives together. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, faith. I mean, my dad is a Baptist minister also, so I don't know if that helped. But I guess it was also the love that was there. But yeah, there are other things that I forgot to mention is even with housing discrimination, like when they were recently had gotten together, when my mom would look for places, it was a little easier, but if my dad was there, it would be a problem. So because she was with a Black man, she kind of like had, in some ways, a Black experience being with him. Not totally, because she's not a Black woman, but she did experience that the same discrimination that Black folks face in those structural ways. So yeah, I mean, and I guess that's why a lot of Asian people don't get with Black folks, because they know that they might have to deal with things like that.
Yeah. And the sense like I'm better than that. I've gotten that sense, at least from my side. But did that racism go away from your Chinese side of the family, at least from what you dealt with, particularly if you became a PhD candidate? Did that change anything? Or
yeah, for me, I think it did get, like, I have met some of my mom's family, and I think that they've been nice. I would also say I haven't had a close relationship, and I think there are different factors for that. I think there's also a language issue, because there was, a lot of them speak Chinese. There are some of them who speak English. There's actually some in Canada, but we're just not close. So I think that they are proud of us. I have 5 other siblings, and I think that they respect us and love us, but we're just not close. And I think there's a lot of factors why. And I do believe that my dad being my dad is part of that.
Okay. And final question on this subject. Have you dealt with any types of racism or discrimination from the greater Asian community?
I would say I haven't felt super connected in some ways. Like, I went to Chinese school, right? But I was also like Black at the same time. And my name is Hui-Ling. Like, so it's funny because I think like one time some Chinese person was like, oh, even they have Chinese names, which is kind of like, what is that supposed to mean? Even they have Chinese names. So I haven't felt super embraced by the community, but I haven't ran to that community either. And it's probably because of just feeling so disconnected from my own family. But I think recently, and living in New York City, it's been a little bit different, because I found communities of like Asian folks who are really about like equity in real ways and racial solidarity with other groups. Okay. So I think it's gotten better, I suppose.
Okay. Speaking of race relations, what is, talking about the model minority, what is the model minority myth?
So the model minority myth is the belief that it's geared towards Asian Americans, particularly, although Asian America is huge, but it's been largely seen for like Chinese, Japanese, Eastern Asians, and that they've been the more successful, they know how to work the system, and they are the better minorities because they've worked hard and have gotten success based on their own merit. Okay. So that's generally how people perceive the model minority. But even the languaging of model minority feels racist. The fact that you have to say that someone is a model minority is like bizarre. We have to be a certain type of way to be respected in this society is just off for me.
Mm-hmm. And it started, I think, in the 1960s. So you cited in your article, Success Story Japanese American Style, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was geared toward a Japanese American man. And, Japanese faced a lot of discrimination here, too. So they, used that Japanese man as a story to be like, look at him. He didn't cause any trouble. And now he's doing really well. Okay. And we need to be more like Japanese Americans. At the same time, the Black Power movement was like picking up. This was like right after the Civil Rights Movement. And Black folks were fighting to not be beat by police. They were fighting to have decent housing. They were fighting for education. And so it's interesting that type of language arose at that same time to parallel those two.
Okay. And I looked at a quote from Success Story Japanese American Style that I wanted to read because it contradicts another article that was written at that time. Yet in one generation or two, each white minority took advantage of the public schools, the free labor market, and America's political democracy. It climbed out of the slums, took on better paying occupations, and acquired social respect and dignity. This is not true, or at least less true, of such non-whites as Negroes, Indians, Mexicans, Chinese, and Filipinos. The reason usually given for this difference is that color prejudice is so great in this country that a person who carries this visible stigma has little or no possibility of rising. There is obviously a good deal of truth in the theory, and the Japanese case is of general interest precisely because it constitutes the outstanding exception. That quote, I want to focus on the Chinese because I don't know if you read the other article I gave you, Success Story of One Minority Group in the U.S., but
I don't know if I read that one.
It praises the Chinese.
Okay.
And it says this. Recently, Dr. Richard T. Sullenberger, professor of psychology at Mount Holyoke College, made a study of New York City's Chinatown and concluded there is a strong incentive for young people to behave. As one informant said, when you walk around the streets of Chinatown, you have 100 cousins watching you. What you find back of this remarkable group of Americans is a story of adversity and prejudice that would shock those now complaining about the hardships endured by today's Negroes. So, like you said, Civil Rights Act, longest debate, I think, in the Senate in U.S. history. Voting Rights Act 1965, Civil Rights Act 1964. These two articles are printed in 1966, but they don't make any sense because one is praising the Japanese while condemning the Chinese, and one is praising the Chinese while condemning the blacks. I don't know, both are condemning the blacks, but it's like, clearly it's a propaganda tactic because you can't say that one group is doing bad and then they're praising them in the same year. It just doesn't make any sense. I just wanted to point that out. But to another subject, you talked about... Yeah, sorry?
Speak to that actually for a second, if you don't mind. Yeah, I think it all is around an anti-Black sentiment. And what's troubling about those statements is that when there's historical examples of when segregation was going on, they would admit some Asian Americans to the white schools, but not Blacks, right? So there was some structural limitations against Black folks that was like a solid wall, where there was some Asians who kind of had some leeway. And the other sad part about this is that there were Asian folks who they advocated to get their children out of Black schools into white schools instead of just advocating for educational equity in general. So they bought into this whiteness, this white supremacy, to continue to hold Black folks down. And what's even more bothersome is that Black people have fought for rights for everybody in this country and have pulled folks up because they've been so discriminated against. But because of Black folks and the civil rights movement and all of that, we have the Mexican American movement, like the Latinos in general. Other Asian groups have done well because women have greatly benefited from affirmative action and what Black people have done in this country. So to turn around and say, you guys are the problem and we're the model minority is just inherently racist.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific examples that you can give in terms of trying to get into the white schools and not getting into the Black schools?
There was an example, I think I cited one in my paper. I want to say it was like Mississippi. It was somewhere in the South. Uyan Poon, who's a scholar at Colorado State University, she also talks about it. And if you want me to send you some of those links, I can do that. Or if you want to wait for me to look it up. But I have it on memorized.
Okay.
The cases.
You can send them to me and then I'll put them in the video. It's fine.
Okay. Will do.
So I didn't want to rush to the next subject, but I brought that up because I thought that because of what's going on right now with the specialized high school admissions test, we'll get to that in a second, that history is repeating itself because you see Black Lives Matter, Trayvon Martin is killed, Black Lives Matter is manifested a year later, 2013, and all these things are going on in terms of Black people standing up for themselves, and now the media turns to, let me look at the articles that I cited, titles such as Whose Sides Are Asian Americans On and Where Does Affirmative Action Leave Asian Americans a couple of years later. So the 60s, civil rights movement, all the media turned to Asians. Black Lives Matter, media turned to Asians a couple of years later. It just seems as though history is repeating itself. I don't know if you've noticed that or...
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I didn't put those two things together until you mentioned it, but I would say for sure that there probably is some relationship because, you still see, there's still huge disparities among the Black community and their white or Asian counterparts. And when I say Asian, I really am not talking about all Asian groups because it's so huge and there's a lot of Asian folks who aren't doing well right now, but we only look to those who are more privileged to turn back to Black people to say that they're not good enough. But it's really systemically is not good enough for Black people or vulnerable people in this country. So yeah, I see that for sure.
Okay, so let's actually talk about the issues now, which are they're complicated. First, the specialized high school admissions test in New York City, which is what your article focuses on. Can you tell the audience what that test is about?
Sure. So I'm not the expert on like the specialized high school. My greater argument was more so about the anti-Black sentiments that exist in the type of rhetoric that the Asian groups were using to sue Carranza and de Blasio about this. But so the SHSAT did you ask me what the test was or what the school was? I'm sorry.
The test.
The test itself, as I understand, and you probably know this better, is a standardized like multiple choice test, and it's the single admission, I guess, criteria for kids to get into that school. And they take the test in 8th grade, but some of them test prep for years beforehand. So you've got like elementary students taking hours out of their day and spending money to get into these specialized high schools by taking this SHSAT.
Yeah. And what's going on right now is that they're trying to get rid of it, right? And there's controversy because some groups don't want it to get removed. I looked into, actually before I get into that, do you know anything about like the how the students are put into those particular schools?
Like, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so one of the things, like in terms of school rank, I think that because there are schools that are higher ranked, like it depends, like how you get in is not necessarily on how hard you work on that particular test, but how you place yourself, like what's your first choice.
Okay, I'm not too familiar with that process.
Okay. In terms of like the fairness, have you looked into that particular issue?
The fairness of the test itself?
Yeah.
Well, I can, like, to give a little background first. I don't know if you're planning to go into this, but the reason why that people are looking at the test, like Carranza and the mayor, and they're trying to reform some things, is because there are like some egregious disparities among New York City students. So it's a majority Black and Latino district, but you have only combined 9% going to these schools. You don't have many people in the Bronx or deep in Brooklyn having access or opportunity even know to take these tests. So it's just kind of to give opportunities for those who don't have it. And to say that there is no talent in the Bronx is just not true. So that's some reasons why. But I veered off your question. You said about fairness.
Yeah, is it test particularly fair? Do you know how, like,
well, a test is a test. So people use these measurements. In fact, I was just at a conference yesterday. Sebastian Chung is at NYU. He's a professor of, I think, applied psychology, but teaches statistics. And he's like, and he's Chinese American. And he talks about how, like, we're somehow obsessed with these measures and they become racialized without us saying things that are, without naming race. But it's just one test. It's one multiple choice test. So to be able to measure someone's intelligence or capability or knowledge or brilliance on a standardized test doesn't seem fair. It doesn't even make sense, to be honest. What it's measuring is how well someone can take a test, how well some prepared for it by either having the funding or spending hours and hours and hours preparing for a test. And it's like, how is that real education when there's so many other things you can be doing to make yourself more worldly or have these different experiences? So in my view, as an education researcher, as a former teacher, as a professor, like, it does not make any sense. It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't, it's not a fair value judgment on our students. It's only to say, like, hey, you know what? These Black kids, these Latino kids, these English language, like these emergent bilinguals, they're just not good enough. And I don't believe that, because I've worked with so many people at this point, so many children, that a lot of their talent isn't seen or valued because we place so much emphasis on these tests.
I think some of the arguments that are made on the other side, particularly if, like you said, like some people go into elementary school studying for these tests, is that instead of getting rid of the tests, try to give the underserved communities better test prep. I think there's an argument. That argument is racially tinged, and I think there are other issues, such as, like, in my opinion, like some people have longer distances to get to the same school as other people. So like that's going to be an issue as well. But I know that the test has been revamped. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the test was before it was revamped. I don't want to quote the entire thing, but in 2005, there was an article titled "Admission Test Scoring Quirk Throws Balance into Question." I'll preface by saying that it says 1/5 of 1% of students scored a perfect on one test. It's English and then math, it tests. And let me see, what's the best way to put this. I won't read the whole thing. Principals said that they were aware that a super high score on one part could substantially lift an applicant's chances because many recent immigrants with extremely limited English skills had earned admission by posting exceptional math scores. To give the Cliff Notes, what it says is that under the old system, if you did really, really, really well on one side, but did really bad on another, or like average on another side, that gave you a better chance to get in than doing really good on both. So the test itself is kind of messed up in that regard. And that's why I'm against it. But there's also the idea that it's changed. It was 50 questions, I think, and 45 for another back then. The Princeton Review said that now it's 47 questions for each section, and then 10 which aren't graded, but you don't know that they're not being graded. So you're taking 57 questions each. And there was a tutoring site that said that sense of the imbalance, you have to do really well on one section and really bad on another, is still there. So I look at this and I say, okay, the people who are working hard to get in, they may not want to get rid of the test simply because they realize that if they are weak in one section and really good in another section, they don't have to really worry so much as working on both. So it's not a matter so much about working hard. It's a matter of, I know how the system works, and I want to keep it that way because I don't really speak English that well. So, not to call anybody out, but I'm going to get into what some of the Asian community is doing. I think there's a point to be made to say that hard work isn't necessarily linear to getting into Stuyvesant, as they're trying to make it seem. I don't know what your thoughts about that are, but
it just sounds like strategy. It just doesn't sound like real learning. It doesn't sound like real education, and it's just at the end of the day, like you're just education. I feel like, and this is sad because I'm so invested in education, but it's like, how far can we push the needle and go further when education has done a lot to just reproduce inequity in our society? And I think that this is what it's doing. It's segregating folks. It's saying that some people are gifted and other people are not. And I just think that's really damaging. And I feel bad for kids who are just sitting there 12 years old and they're studying for a test all day when they could be learning languages, playing instruments, like writing stories, reading books. Like, it just doesn't add up for me.
Yeah. And the politicians have flipped on this as well. Grace Meng is a politician. She used the Civil Rights Act in the New York Post to justify keeping the test, which was a new low. Eric Adams, who's a Brooklyn Borough president, stood up for the Chinese American community when they had to deal with graffiti, but then flipped on the test because of Chinese donors. Ron Kim, another politician, was for it, getting rid of it back in 2014, but when it came to voting in 2018, NBC News reported that he voted against it.
Okay.
It seems as though, at least in New York, that some of the things that are going on right now with the administration is kind of like changing public perception, although I think that's debatable. I think part of what's going on is that there are forces that are greater right now that are trying to keep this test for their own purposes. Not to sound redundant, but that's what I wanted to say. But moving on to the next subject, what do you know anything about the Discovery Program, what that is?
When I was writing that article, I was doing a little research on it. From my understanding, that Discovery Program was made so that students who still tested pretty high, but didn't quite make it and were from, I guess, like underrepresented areas or regions or boroughs, could still go through this program that would help ease them into the school. I don't remember if they got it in automatically or like it just gave them a better chance.
I don't want to say something and then have to retract it, but I think I'm probably going to retract this. That it's a matter of getting people in who just missed the cutoff score. They have to take like a summer course,
right? And
they get in, and that's supposed to target Black and Latino students. And I think we mentioned over the phone that some Asian American groups are against that. So it's not just they're against the tests; they're against the Discovery Program, which isn't even getting rid of the tests. So
it's not even getting rid of the test, and they're mad that it might double Black and Latino to 10 to 20%. So it's still not even a huge increase. Like, it's still not even doing enough. And it's just sad that they're looking at these kids who probably more than deserve to be getting it in like a better education, or if that's a quote unquote a better education, as the problem instead of like larger systemic things. Yeah. And I think people who, especially like white conservatives who are using, they love to be like, oh, well, Asian Americans, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's not about like integrated curriculum where you see like Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Filipinos represented in the curriculum. We don't have like, still like white supremacy is still very much intact because most presidents are white, people who control the media are white. So it's not about actually like saying like we're creating a more equitable system. It's really just keeping whiteness as a standard, because we're, even with Asian American or Chinese, some groups doing well on that test, it's not challenging any of these structures, and it's not actually changing power.
One more thing I wanted to mention on this particular part. John Yoo he helped write the torture memos during the Bush administration, I believe. He was at the Harvard Club talking about getting rid of even the Discovery program. And he said basically this, quote, "Thank you. Yoo was grateful for city officials," he said, "for presenting a case that's going to be so easy for us to win." Later on in the article, proving discriminatory intent, however, can be daunting, he said, "but thankfully your mayor and your school's chancellor love to prove the hard parts of the case for us," Yoo said to laughter from the audience. You know, I've had my experiences with racism in the Asian community, but it's kind of like open now, and it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, we can have the debate. We understand that blacks and Hispanics are underrepresented, right? So what are we going to do about it? Want to get rid of the test? No, we're going to buy politicians to get rid of the test. Okay, let's do the Discovery program. Both are not affirmative action, but you want to sue the city to get rid of the Discovery program. What's your solution? And I think what I'm saying is, at least for this particular instance, if we can't get to a meeting of the minds on how to fix this particular issue, or like, whatever, they're just trying to block everything, I think at a certain point it's just a matter of, okay, we know what this is about. And I don't want to deny that element of it, given that there is anti-blackness in the Asian community. I hear stuff like, "Thank you for getting a case that's so easy to win." I'm just like, all right, yeah, not everybody who's trying to keep the test is a racist, but some have racist intentions. I don't know what your thoughts about that were, but.
Well, I definitely do agree that there are some anti-black sentiment in the Asian community. That's true. For a lot of reasons, because folks are socialized to think that blacks are at the bottom. Clara Jean Kim, I want to say, I forgot what year, 1990, she talks about racial triangulation, and that, Asians are kind of seen as the wedge in this community to divide folks, because they're not better than whites, but they're better than blacks. And, they're seen as these perpetual foreigners, and it's problematic. At the same time, I want to keep in mind that there is a white supremacist structure intact. Like, it's been in our country since the beginning. It's helped formulate the country. I know that that's a controversial statement, but historically it's true, and those systems still exist today. And when we look at Asian Americans, we want to remember that there are actually a lot of Asian Americans who are for affirmative action. In fact, I don't know if you saw the report that, let me see, because I just had it up, but it's called AAPI data. And so they did a survey about Asian American attitudes on affirmative action. It's by Janelle Wong and Karthik Ramark. I can send you the link, but it's basically just showing that I think that they're amplifying these racist, anti-Black Asian voices to support, this like a white supremacist agenda, because who still is in control largely of people running schools is white people. You don't see Chinese American teachers or, superintendent or politicians mostly. I mean, I know you mentioned some, but like largely it's white folks who are running things. And I think that it's helpful for them to keep their power intact, to divide people of color.
Okay. that it's actually great that you mentioned racial triangulation. I think it was '99 that Claire Jean Kim published that, and that really like opened my mind to what was going on. I think as a politician, you're in a weird scenario because there are private schools in New York City, right? Mm-hmm. And Teach.com says that private schools are not funded or operated by federal, state, or local governments. They are not paid for by public tax dollars and are not subject to regulations that govern public schools. There's a system in New York City called the Ivy Preparatory School League. They all have a majority white population. Collegiate School, 54% white. Dalton School, 57%. Fieldson, 88%. Hackley, 67%. Horace Mann, around 62%. Poly Prep, 61%. Riverdale, 61%. Trinity School, 55%. And that's where the foreigner aspect comes in, because it's like affirmative action doesn't really help Asian Americans. I don't know, but we need to help Black and Hispanic people who are at the bottom. Are we going to have to squeeze Asians to do that because we're not going to let them in the private schools, even though we think that they're really smart? But we're not. Where are they going to go if we give Black and Hispanic people the opportunity to go to these schools? So it's this wedge that you create. And what's sad about it is, and you talked about white supremacy, is that no matter what happens with this particular test, whether Blacks and Hispanics get more seats or Asians keep the seats that they have, whites are going to still get their private schools at the end of the day in New York City. Sure. Which is the real problem. But Bill de Blasio, since it's a private school, he can't touch that. Yeah. It's a no-win situation in many cases. Yeah.
Even for Harvard, I know we're not talking about Harvard, but like legacy kids and kids like in the whole USC, the scandal with like the rich white celebrities paying for their kids to go. Nobody's like, oh, well, we need to attack them. Like, but like there's still data that shows that you're likely to get into a college if you've got money backing you. Like if you have a donor or like some rich person that could donate to that school, that's going to count for you. But we don't look at that as far as the issue. We look at the Black kid that got in.
Yeah, it's just, you worry about the 5 people that are Black that get in, but not the 500 white people that got in based off of their last name, they're a Kennedy. But that's how this system works. It's not what you know, but who you know in many cases, or how much money you have. But speaking about the Harvard lawsuit, that's actually the next thing I wanted to talk about. Do you have any thoughts about that, or will you know what that's about if you want to share?
Yeah, I know that it was led by, a white conservative, Edward Bloom. So he's over here curating it. The whole, if you have the wrong skin color, fill this out. And it's like, well, are Black and Latinos filling that out, right? Like why you didn't get in? So again, I think this is even more disgusting, I think, than the New York City case, because it's so obviously led by a white guy, like led by white conservatives, who are just trying to divide and conquer folks of color getting into Ivy League schools. It's like I really feel like they're really trying to protect their schools. Like this is not for the Black community at all. Yeah. And it's I think it's highly racist. I'm glad that they settled against that case. What is it? Students for
Fair Admissions.
Fair Admissions, right. Yeah. And I heard that Edward Bloom is still going to appeal. But at this day and age, we can't just pretend like race doesn't exist. We can't pretend like the legacy of housing discrimination didn't exist. We can't pretend like opportunities and resources are hoarded in white communities. We can't pretend that like people of color are still going to schools that barely have resources, are in high turnover rates of teachers. There's the prison industrial complex. I mean, it's like, it's all in our face. So to pretend like, oh, we can't look at race or we can't look at these people's experience holistically, it's not helpful at all. In fact, it's going to move us backwards.
Yeah. And, another thing is, like, I think some people who want to get really into the numbers will say, well, there are some Asians that worked hard and got high grades, so maybe they have a point. But to put that to the side, I wanted to share some articles. So the NPR said, when they started talking about this lawsuit, a coalition of more than 60 organizations accuses Harvard of holding Asian American applicants to higher standards than Black and Latino applicants. And white. So we're not talking about white people.
They didn't mention white people at all.
Yeah, not in that particular instance.
Yeah, you can't challenge white students. They're not challenging white structure.
Yeah. And at that time, the Boston Globe reported that 2017 was the second year in a row that Harvard College sent acceptance letters to students that weren't white, but still seats a majority white population. And the New York Times article that I gave you with all those schools, what was really interesting about that was that it showed that for Harvard University as a whole, that in 2014, I think, was the first, because it goes to 2015. 2014 was the first year that Harvard overall dipped to below 50%. And that's when the lawsuit, according to USA Today, that's when it came. So it's like, you put that two and two together and you say, okay, that's why you're salty, or that's why you're mad.
Sure.
One more thing I wanted to mention about that, you mentioned the legacies. This is from LA Times. From 2010 to 2015, Harvard's admission rate for legacies was 34%, while its admission rate for non-legacies was 6%. In other words, legacy applicants are nearly six times more likely to get admitted than applicants who do not have a Harvard-educated parent. The advantage is even greater for double legacies, or those with two parents who graduated from Harvard. It basically found that white legacy students admitted to Harvard exceeded the number of African American, Hispanic, and Asian American legacy students combined.
Wow.
One more. Sorry, I knew I was going to. The article, The Making of a Feeder School. 1 out of every 20 Harvard freshmen, this is in the Crimson, attended one of 7 high schools represented in the class of 2017. Boston Latin, public, 46% white. Phillips Academy in Andover, private, 54% white. Stuyvesant, public, 73% Asian. Noble and Greenborough School, private, 68% white. Phillips Exeter Academy, private, 58% white. Trinity School, 55% white. Lexington, 52% white. I might have missed the private and public part, but I'll put that in the video. And 74% of schools sent only one student. I'm really hammering this home because I'm just tired of this racism, and I'm just trying to show that there's a reason why this is all happening right now. It's because there are some people at the top who have had their grandsons go to these same schools, who want their grandkids to go to those schools as well, and they're just trying to keep that pipeline.
That's a real thing.
And that's what it comes down to. And I think that if you look at that, you get away from all those statistics that try to, frame things in a way that say maybe black people need to work a little bit harder and show the system for what it really is.
Sure.
Yeah. But not to ramble before I get to my next subject, but I wanted to get your thoughts on all that.
I mean, I think you said it. I mean, you had the statistics. I just, there is a generational wealth and power that's been passed down among white folks in this country. And, they feel uncomfortable with giving that up, I suppose, or they think it's giving it up. I really think it's just hurting all of us. And then, of course, if we want to talk about black folks in particular, I'm Black American, so I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans. And, it wasn't like when slavery was abolished, everything was cool.
Yeah.
We had sharecropping, we barely get any wealth or power. We did have Reconstruction where we kind of started to get ahead a little bit, but then, that got destroyed. We had Jim Crow. And this was not that long ago when people were drinking out of separate fountains and going to different schools. And even when we did integrate, it was more so that, white folks weren't going to the black schools to integrate. Like, it was still this valuing that white schools were better, white communities are better. That's how this country is racialized and still is to this day. So if you bring black people to Harvard or these specialized schools, guess what people are going to say? Oh, well, you're bringing down the value of our school. And that's just inherently racist. And it shows how much further this country needs to go. So we're pretending like a lot of this language and this rhetoric is colorblind, or as some people say, color evasive, because you're not colorblind, you're just hating it. And you're not considering all of these factors and privileges that exist among identities, white people, rich people, so on and so forth.
I think I got lost there, right?
No, I heard all that. I don't want to see this. It got a little bit choppy. I heard that.
Break up.
Yeah, it broke up. But I heard the majority of it. It's just the screen I don't know what to do. And it's still kind of. No, it's not the camera. It's the connection.
Oh, I don't know what to do about that.
Maybe I have my phone too close. I don't know. But it's actually, I didn't want to go on anymore because now it's really kind of, I don't know what to do.
Okay, we'll wait till it gets. Yeah, you're.
But can you see me?
I can. Sometimes it's fuzzy. Or I guess it's getting clearer.
It's getting clearer now.
Am I fuzzy?
Not as fuzzy.
Okay.
Not okay. I can. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to waste your time.
No, I forgot what I was saying.
No, you were talking about and I was gonna go on to that with that the whole the schools. If you're putting in more black people, it's gonna devalue the schools, which is just it's obviously racially tinged. And I wanted to point out that it's integration is always on white people's terms. Like Jackie Robinson, he had to go to the major leagues. It wasn't that white people said, okay, we need to go to the Negro leagues. We need to black people integrate to the majors.
HBCU with basketball.
Yeah.
Sent them to white schools and not the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, it's based off of the system. It's that these communities have been historically oppressed, so like the money that they have, creates this system where we say, okay, certain groups aren't as valuable as others based off of that. I don't want to get like communist or anything. I'm not going that route, but I do want to say that race and money like that there's a connection to that, and then like we value people based off of that particular system. Yeah.
And I would just add, and talking about this test, and people really okay, so the Chinese Americans who really believe in this test, I mean, I believe that they really believe in it. They believe that it measures merit. Maybe in China, maybe, but like in this country where there was enslavement, where there was Jim Crow, where there's a prison industrial complex, where people are policed, black people are over policed and sent to jails. There's no way a single test can measure merit in this country. It's just not. It's not possible, given our historical background and race and power to this day.
Can you
so
say
that's
that?
why we do these things. Yeah.
Can you say that? Yeah, you broke up there. You said race and power, and then it got cut off.
I was just saying that and that was the end of what I was saying, but I was just saying that race, there's no way that we can measure intelligence, education, or merit based on a single test, given the history of this country, given the race and power dynamics that exist today and previously.
Yeah. And again, it's something that you can't win with because, and that's the last topic I wanted to cover. Proposition 209. Do you know about what happened in California, Proposition 209?
Okay, so the interesting about Prop 209 is I'm from California. Okay. So when I was about 5 years old, I was going to protest. I don't know if I'm breaking up. Sounds like it.
A little bit, yeah.
Protest at like 5 years old. Anti-209 protest with my father because he was kind of active in the community. And so even though I was like a little kid, I knew it had something to do with like justice and equality. And I would proudly wear the little pins that I got at those protests, like going to my kindergarten class with like a Stop Prop 209. So I remember those are my earliest memories of it. And as I grew older, like I kind of understood like it's about affirmative action, and then they ended up getting rid of it, or they passed it, right?
They passed it, yeah. Still there.
And I don't know the newest developments of that, but that's how I came into understanding 209.
Yeah. Well, it's still there. I haven't been to California, but because I was trying to see if there was a similar issue in this country, I went to California, which is another blue state, but it's still there. I'll read the definition for it based off of Britannica. Opposition to affirmative action in California culminated in the passage in 1996 of the California Civil Rights Initiative, Prop 209, which prohibited all government agencies and institutions from giving preferential treatment to individuals on the basis of their sex or race, or their race or sex. The Supreme Court effectively upheld the constitutionality of Prop 209 in November of 1997 by refusing to hear a challenge to its enforcement. And the New York Times article, which talks about the Harvard stuff, the Harvard demographics, shows that under the University of California system, which is public, which is subjected to 209, the largest group of people in most of those schools is Asian, such as like Berkeley, UCLA. The exceptions are UC Santa Barbara and UC Santa Cruz, which largest population is white. They're not the majority, but the largest. And UC Merced, which is majority Hispanic, but it's the newest one.
Yeah.
Caltech, which is private, is actually 50% Asian, 32% white. Stanford, though, is 41% white. It's just a Harvard of California. And USC is 47% white. So, with the exception of Caltech, it seems to be that same thing that I was talking about in New York City. Like, you got the Ivy Preparatory School League, mostly white. Asians get the elite public schools, blacks and Hispanics, with the same situation over here. Stanford, white, and then UC Berkeley, Asian, most of them Asian, and then blacks and Hispanics. So once again, you have as a politician a situation where you say, I only control the public schools. How am I going to get black and Hispanic people in here when there's an affirmative action ban, and convince the Asian community to go with it where it may or may not help them? White supremacy is really, it's something else.
It is. And it's interesting why, and I think I've already said this, but it's like, you're not turning to the right people. You're turning to disenfranchise Black and Latino students to be like they're the problem. It's just not the case. When people are, and white people in particular, are hoarding this power. And like, we're not helping anybody by actually stepping on Black people who have fought, and I'm directing this to the Asian community now, who have fought for everybody's civil rights.
Yeah. Last thing I'll mention is, again, the politicians, because this was like kind of where I drew the line in terms of like, okay, maybe Asians have a point. Like, Jen Feng is a blogger for Reappropriate. She runs that blog. She talked about Senate Constitutional Amendment 5, which was supposed to get rid of Prop 209 in 2014. So this is under Obama. This is before Trump and all this came out. Ted Lieu had supported it, Senate Constitutional Amendment number 5, but then withdrew it later that year. And Judy Chu did not. Now, okay, Judy Chu's an Asian politician, fine, whatever. But the thing about her is that she's the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress, and she did it in 2009 by when Hinda Solis left her seat to run under the Obama administration. I'll put the articles up there because I don't want to read all the quotes; it'll be too long. She ran against other Hispanics. One of the articles that I'll show says that she got 1 of 3 Hispanics to vote for her in the primary, and she took that seat away from the Hispanic community.
Okay.
And she got redistricted when she went against SCA 5, but nevertheless, if we're going to talk about, okay, listen, it's not about race, but fair is fair, then and I know politics is messed up, but Judy Chu literally took a spot away from an Hispanic seat in politics to diversify herself where she's underrepresented. But then when the roles are reversed, now all of a sudden you're against SCA 5. I have my own personal issues with the Asian community, which is why I talk about this stuff. But I just don't want to. I do want to mention that white supremacy is the main issue. But let's not ignore the fact that if we're talking about the model minority, and some people are saying that it's a myth, that when it comes to actually voting somewhere, or like, putting your money where your mouth is, that doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of us people of color are existing in a white supremacist society. So we're going to do things that are going to help us not get slammed by that system. And even other people, Black folks will, for lack of better words, sell themselves out to feel safe in that.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I hear the static. I just hear static.
I don't know what to do. I know it messes up the flow, but I can't do anything.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was just commenting on that as far as how she kind of just switched up, and I have a hunch that that's due to her. I just hear static. Do you hear me clearly? Okay. It's just due to her positionality in politics, because at the end of the day, you really are supporting. I don't know. Maybe I'm cynical. I don't have much faith in our political system. I know there are people who are really trying, right? But some of us just get swept in, and we It's all about appearances and doing things that are going to appease people in power.
But I guess, I understand the system that we're in. I understand that there are certain, things that are going on. I just want to, as somebody hears like the model minority myth and it's bad and stuff like that, like now all of a sudden it seems to be that it's being upheld when it comes to actually doing something. I don't want it to be, particularly if that under SCA 5, which happened under Obama, because it was 2014. I want to say, okay, it's not just white supremacy here. There's another element, which is why I reached out, because, I heard the story that you had about the anti-blackness that you faced and your father faced. And to say that that's not connected to what's going on right now, I think it's a little bit, it is.
Yeah. Parallel. It's parallel. And okay, so I'm Black and I'm Asian. So I'm Asian, and not only am I Asian, I'm Chinese. Mm-hmm. My mom is a Chinese immigrant. I mean, she immigrated back in the late 70s or in the mid 70s, I think. But she's a Chinese immigrant, right? And so a lot of Asian folks, not my mother, or because she married a Black man, but they, feel like whiteness. In fact, my mom was told by another a family that came from Taiwan, to immediately Black neighborhoods that, they're dangerous and scary and don't go near them by any means, right? That's the type of socialization that Asian immigrants or Chinese immigrants are getting when they step into this country. At least that was back in the 70s. But I don't have the luxury of trying to vouch for whiteness because I'm Black too.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm not going to step on my other me. I'm not going to step on my family and my historical legacy because I know the resilient, the rich legacy that I come from on both sides. And so a lot of times the white supremacist structure tries to pit us against us, and us fighting for crumbs, like, taking seats from the Latino community. We're fighting each other to have that power when there's another structure in place, a standard of whiteness that we need to dismantle and not buy into in order for us to really seek some type of liberation and solidarity.
Yeah. But what's so, I guess, difficult about it is that like the system is designed so that we fight rather than attack it.
Absolutely. And
that when I looked at those private schools and how they're mostly white and how they're not funded by the government and like you're a politician, they're like, what are you supposed to do? Yeah, I wanted to point that out because I think there's a lot of, it's a very, very, very crazy political environment right now. And I wanted to look back, show what was going on, show how the media is creating this division, how the system creates this division. So everybody can just step back and say, hold on, we're playing into it.
For sure.
But that's all I wanted to get through in terms of the topics. I don't know if you had anything else to add. I hope that there isn't going to be too much of an issue with the connection. I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But
I don't know if I have anything else to add. I think I pretty much covered it with the last thing as far as Joel Black and Jersey. I'm done talking. I don't know. It could be my problem, and I'm sorry. But no, is there anything else that?
No, I mean it's fine. Just don't kill me if your side doesn't look as clear as it should. It's I don't know what to do. But
okay.
I do thank you for bringing this up. I mean, I'll say one last thing. For me, this is personal because I had attended Harvard, and as I mentioned, and then I attended Brooklyn Tech. So it's very hard. I talk about the dating aspect on my channel. It's very. I've seen this going on. It's very hard for me to not talk about this without getting very, very angry. But I had to say something, and I wanted to reach out to somebody that was also covering it as well. But I do want to say that as somebody that attended these two schools, I am not in any way happy with what's going on, and I'm really pissed off about it, to be honest. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. And again,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for covering these issues and speaking out as someone who's an alum to kind of help those after you.
Yeah.
It's definitely a hot topic.
Sorry?
I'm just saying it's definitely a hot topic right now. So super controversial. People are going to be mad at you for this, by the way.
It's not something that I'm not used to. You're a journalist. You're going to get people mad at you.